Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome back, everybody. It's nice to see you in the virtual world again today. Okay. How was your midterm break? Did you get outside to breathe some fresh air?
I went to Florida.
Okay. All right. Well, folks, welcome back. I hope you're doing okay. And I do hope that, over the past couple of days, you had a little bit of time to take for yourself, because that is important as well. So welcome back. And, I was just looking at the course syllabus to look at the schedule. And it may be of interest to you that literally today, October 20th, is basically the tipping point of midway between the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester. So once we get past today's date, basically you are closer to the end of your semester than you are the beginning of your semester. So hopefully that makes you feel good that you're making progress towards the end. Okay, we're going to finish our coverage of chapter 5 this morning and put ourselves in good shape to begin chapter 6 next week. Also, you remember that we do not have lab this morning. Okay, we're taking a little bit of a break to keep the two classes that I teach aligned with each other. So do you have any questions at this time before I continue our conversation in chapter 5? Okay, well, welcome back, folks. Let's begin again. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, and I'll bring up the notes and we'll get started here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the anatomy of the skin, and last time we finished with a conversation talking about functions of the skin. I want to continue and extend that conversation because we only got a little ways into it. So at this moment in time, if you have your textbook open and you're looking at things, the part of the chapter here that I'm looking at is in chapter 5. And let's see here, let me get you a page number. Okay, functions of the skin on the physical printed textbooks, page 164, 165. Not a lot of pictures here. In fact, no pictures, but a lot of text talking about functions of the skin. So I'm going to continue in your notes from that position. So letter A here is thermoregulation. We said that this is a fancy way to refer to regulation of your body temperature. Okay, your skin has a great deal of surface area, so that can be used to hold on to or release heat when necessary. Okay, letter B, another function of the skin is to act as a blood reservoir. That's a fancy way of saying because of the surface area of the skin and the mass of the skin, we can use the skin structure to actually warehouse a lot of our blood volume. In fact, your book tells you that the dermis, the second layer of your skin, the dermis houses an extensive layer of blood vessels. And at times of rest, typically the dermis will hold anywhere from 8 to 10% of your total blood volume. Okay, so the dermis houses an extensive network of blood vessels that typically carry about 8 to 10% of total blood volume at any given moment in time. All right, so hopefully that's straightforward enough. Letter C, third function of the skin is protection. Protection is actually a big topic. There's lots of things we can say in terms of protection. So we'll list some things out here that are relevant for the protective capabilities and capacities of your skin. Some of these things we said before, but since it's been a while, probably would be useful to review a little bit. Well, we recall that, so Israel, I'm looking at a comment in the chat window, Israel pages 164 and 165. If you're using the digital version of the textbook, those page numbers may be a little bit off because I'm looking at the physical book, but somewhere around page 164, you will see a section heading which states functions of the skin. Okay, so you recall from our conversation about the structure of the epidermis that we have many keratinocytes. Keratinocytes in the epidermis. Keratinocytes are cells like any other cell, but they're typically called keratinocytes because if you do a compositional analysis of the cell, you will find an abundance of a special protein found in the skin called keratin, okay? So keratin, which I'll put in parentheses, is a protein, protects the surface of our skin from microbes that might want to penetrate into our body. So it provides a sort of physical barrier, if you will, a sort of molecular cheesecloth, if you will, to help filter and keep things out. So keratin protects against microbes. It also protects against physical abrasion. Now, obviously, skin is soft and pliable, but you can pick up objects. You can pick up pens and pencils on your desk. You can pick up a cup of coffee, and you don't rip off a whole bunch of skin when you do it, right? That's because there is some structural integrity to the skin, largely in part due to the presence of keratin protein. So keratin protects against microbes. It protects against abrasion. Keratin is mildly heat resistant, so it does provide some limited protection against heat. And in general, it does provide sort of a barrier to a variety of chemicals that, if keratin were not present, might try to invade the body, and limited chemical protection. So keratin has a number of protective characteristics to it. Okay, let's talk about your sweat. Okay, your sweat, if you were to take some drops of sweat of your body and put them in a pH meter, what we would notice is that your sweat is mildly acidic. Okay, the pH of sweat. And of course, sweat is formed from your sweat glands. We haven't put that into your notes yet, but it's coming. I'm going to get that into your notes today. I'm going to get it into your notes today. The pH of sweat is mildly acidic, and the mild acidity of the sweat is actually antibacterial. Okay, so what we're saying is that the acidity of your sweat protects you against various species of bacteria that might cause you harm. And generally speaking, the surface of your skin is not a very good home for many types of microorganisms that might want to live off the surface of our body. There are exceptions, however. Okay, and I'm going to document that here in your notes. Okay, so let me ask you in the chat window. Okay, let me ask you in the chat window. What does MRSA stand for? MRSA. I bet you've heard of MRSA, okay, as a problem point.
Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus.
Good job, Kendall, right? Good job. It is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So you did real good with that, okay? Staphylococcus aureus is a gram-positive bacterium. Many of us walking around in our communities do have it on the surface of our skin. And the traditional standard version of Staphylococcus aureus doesn't tend to cause any harm to folks. but there is a subtype, a subspecies of Staphylococcus aureus, which is a little bit genetically different from the average run-of-the-mill Staphylococcus aureus, which is a problem. And this particular subtype or subvariety of Staphylococcus aureus is called methicillin resistant. And what that means is that this category of bacteria is resistant to a type of antibiotic known as methicillin and its cousins. So long story short, as you've heard from perhaps your experience working in the clinic or volunteering at places, MRSA infections are a pretty significant deal and can really make people sick. Okay, so MRSA, let's get this in your notes. MRSA is short for methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Okay, this is a gram-positive bacterium that unfortunately does have a physiology that allows it to live and somewhat thrive under the acidic conditions of our sweat. Okay. Okay. So while the pH of sweat is antibacterial in nature and prevents many categories of bacteria that might want to cause harm from living on our skin, there are some notable exceptions, probably the most famous of which is MRSA. Okay. All right. Do you have any thoughts or questions about that? Okay. So if you take a microbiology course, you'll learn all about MRSA and many other species of bacteria during that course. Okay, protection, that's our topic here. So we have keratin protecting us from a variety of hazards. We have the acidity of your sweat being protective against many species of bacteria, not all species. We have the melanin from the melanocytes. Melanin is produced in melanocytes, and it protects our skin cell DNA from damage from ultraviolet radiation. Okay. Now, of course, it is not 100% protective. And what I mean by that is that we still do have many cases of skin cancer every year, but there would be a lot more skin cancer if we didn't have this natural product in our skin produced from the melanocytes. Melanin as a chemical has the ability to absorb ultraviolet radiation and prevent it from damaging the DNA. Okay. When melanin is unable to protect skin cell DNA, the ultraviolet radiation promotes the formation of changes in the structure of our DNA. There's a variety of things that could be said about that, but I'll mention one of them that's famous here. And if you're really interested, you can go Google it and do a little bit of reading. One of the most famous changes to DNA that overexposure to sunlight will do is called a dimer, a thymine dimer. Exposure of our skin cells to ultraviolet radiation promotes the formation of thymine dimers in our DNA. Okay, thymine dimers in our day screw up the proper process of DNA replication when skin cells try to reproduce and make new skin cells. So we end up with cells that have abnormal DNA, which is basically the trigger that then promotes the formation of cancer. Okay, so if you're curious about these topics, and these are topics that would typically come about and we would talk in much greater detail in a course like an undergraduate genetics course. Okay, so, all right. Okay, folks, do you have any questions about that? Okay. All right, please let me know if you have questions along the way here. Okay, we're going to continue with protection. So melanin is protective against DNA damage. You remember the video I showed you last time about immunology in the skin? Okay, last time I showed that. Also provided the link in your notes so that you can watch it again. Remember, there's these things called dendritic cells. In the video, they were called Langerhans cells. And these cells are they have a surveillance mechanism in the anatomy of the skin. They can actually detect microbes laying on the surface of the skin or that start to penetrate into the epidermis. And then they can alert the immune system that there's a problem. Immune system cells will then invade that space through the bloodstream and start attacking the microorganisms. Okay. All right. So, dendritic cells, Langerhans cells, actively surveil the skin and alert the immune system to potential microbial invaders. And in addition to that, there is a variety of various macrophages that exist in the fabric of your skin. Those macrophages are a type of white blood cell. They are the type of immune system cell that have the ability to phagocytose and literally eat bacteria, viruses, things that might be attempting to enter our bodies. Okay, folks, do you have any questions about some of the protective characteristics of skin that we've documented in your notes?
What's the thymine dimer again?
What is a thymine dimer? Okay, good question, Noah. A thymine dimer is an abnormal structure in DNA that is formed when too much sunlight, too much ultraviolet radiation strikes the DNA. Let me see if I can bring up a quick image of a thymine dimer here in Google Images. Let me see if I can find something for you. If you recall our conversation about the structure of DNA in chapters 2 and 3, when we were talking about things, you remember that thymine is one of the nitrogen bases. It's one of the nucleotides found in DNA. Okay, let's see here. Right. Okay. All right, I don't want to get too sophisticated at the chemical level at this point. Here we go. This is probably the best one. See if we can get this a little bit bigger. Okay, so if you can see my screen right now, Noah, right here on the left, you have two thymine nitrogen bases hanging off the backbone of the DNA strand here. That's how thymine is supposed to be positioned. When these structures are hit by ultraviolet radiation from sunlight, they will form bonds in between themselves, highlighted right here. If you can see that right here in the image, that is abnormal. That should not exist, and that will impair the cell's ability to properly replicate its DNA. And so you end up with cells with mutated DNA, okay, and that's the trigger that then causes the formation of many forms of cancer. Okay. Noah, did you have any other question about that?
No, you're good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So let's continue here. All right. So letter D, for functions of the skin. The skin provides the capacity to have sensations at the surface of the body. And think about how nice it is to get a nice hug from your son or daughter, or from grandma and grandpa, or from mom and dad, or your friend. Okay, that would not be possible if it wasn't for the anatomy of the skin. Okay, so we have the necessary nervous system anatomy, the necessary nervous system apparatus, if you will, that allows for a variety of sensations at the skin. Sensations at the surface of the skin include, okay, touch, right? So you can tell when somebody's touching you or pressing up against you. Okay, we can feel pressure. It's nice to get a bear hug. You can feel the pressure of a bear hug. If you've ever been mowing the yard, right? A lot of times you mow the yard and you can feel the vibration of the engine in your lawnmower, so we can detect vibration. They're actually specialized, there's different nerve endings, if you will, for lack of a deeper understanding at this moment. There's different types of nerve endings that convey different types of sensations at the surface of the skin. We'll be talking more about those later in our course, but we can detect vibration. We can detect tickling, right? Tickling has its own sensory apparatus. We can detect warmth. There's free nerve endings that detect changes in heat. There's also free nerve endings that detect coolness, okay? Okay, and there are also nerve endings which are pain receptors. We can detect pain, okay? So let me just make a comment about that. Within the fabric of our skin's anatomy, there's a variety of different types of nervous system sensors, and one of those are called mechanoreceptors. Pain receptors are a type of mechanoreceptor, and what I mean by that is these mechanical receptors, when you compress your skin, or when you pinch your skin, or when you overstretch your skin, you change the shape of these mechanical receptors, you change the shape of these proteins in such a way that they fire off electrical signals to the brain, and your brain interprets them as pain, okay? So in terms of pain reception, typically these pain receptors will activate anytime the tissue that the receptor is in is being compressed or stretched in a way where the tissue can actually start to tear and actually physically be damaged, okay? Specialized mechanical receptors in the skin, called pain receptors, are specialized proteins that change shape when tissue is, when skin is excessively stretched or compressed, such that the skin is in danger of being damaged. Okay, we haven't talked to you about the electrical signals yet. I mean, we haven't talked to you about the nature of them, the depolarization, repolarization. That's stuff that's coming up in the bottom third of our term with each other. Okay. All right. So let's see here, just a little bit extra detail here on sensations at the surface of the body. The different types of nerve endings and so forth that we have, I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list at this time, but I will mention a couple of them here. So the nerve endings in the skin include tactile discs of the epidermis. Okay, let's see here. You might recall from figure 5.2, you see the tactile epithelial cells. That's what we're talking about, the tactile epithelial cells here. tactile disc of epidermis. That's figure 5.2. In addition to that, we have other sensory anatomy called corpuscles of touch. Corpuscle of touch, we can see that in figure 5.1. If you have your book available, figure 5.1, left-hand side column of terms. The sixth term down is a tactile corpuscle. Okay, and you can see this yellow bulb-like structure that's embedded inside a dermal papillae. Okay, so that is figure 5.1. I'll mention one more here. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. In addition to these things, we also have what are called hair root plexuses. That's something I'm going to be sharing with you in just a moment when we start talking about hair. Let's see here. If you want to take a look at this really quick, figure 5.4. Figure 5.4, you see in panel A hair root plexus. This is the nervous tissue around each hair follicle and allows the nervous system to be aware when the hair on the surface of your skin is being moved, either because somebody's touching it or wind is blowing across the surface of the hair. And that is figure 5.4. Okay. All right, folks. So suffice it to say, we get to enjoy the experiences of life at the surface of our skin because of a variety of nervous system structures embedded in the fabric of the skin. Okay, let's continue here. Letter E. Another function of the skin is to enable your body to remove material through excretion and at times to absorb material into the skin and then ultimately potentially into the bloodstream. Okay, so excretion and absorption. Okay, let's take excretion first. Now, obviously, the most notable thing that we excrete from the surface of our skin is probably going to be our sweat. I mean, there is oil and things as well, but when we sweat, we notice that we're releasing material on the surface of our skin. So sweat obviously is made of water, and as we've said before, water as a liquid is made of water molecules that are connected by hydrogen bonds. The geometry of the hydrogen bond angle actually allows water to retain heat energy, and so when sweat forms on the surface of our skin and it evaporates, and those hydrogen bonds are broken, you actually release heat energy off into the atmosphere and remove it from your body. So sweat removes heat and water from the body. Okay. Additionally, when we sweat, well, let me ask you this in the chat window. Here we go. Have you ever had a drop of sweat enter your mouth? What did it taste like, folks? Okay, you've been working out at the gym, you know, you're sweating coming down your cheek there. Okay, a little bit of sweat drops into your mouth, right? We've all had that experience. We know that sweat tastes salty, so that tells us that there is in fact sodium chloride in the sweat. Okay, so when we excrete sweat and everything that's in the sweat. Okay, so additionally, sweat contains a small amount of salts, sodium chloride being the primary one, but you can also detect other things like calcium chloride. So small amounts of salts, small amounts of carbon dioxide. everybody knows that when we breathe, okay, when we mechanically inhale and then exhale, right, when we breathe out, we are exhaling carbon dioxide. Most people know that. You've been around, you've had health class in high school. But did you know that there's actually some dissolved carbon dioxide in the sweat? So we release a little bit of sweat. We release a little bit of carbon dioxide. We also release a little bit of ammonia, NH4, and a nitrogen compound called urea, which is from the natural breakdown of proteins in our body. Okay, so sweat is actually pretty complicated from a biochemical perspective. Okay, all right. So next, hold on a second. I'm going to get invaded here. We just adopted a new kitty cat, and the darn thing doesn't listen to me with a darn. So hold on a second. Got to get rid of the cat. All right, out you go. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, so we have some sweat excretion from the body. Now, absorption is the other capability of our skin. Okay. When we absorb things, we're typically, the skin's anatomy is capable of absorbing lipid-soluble materials. And so that's why, your skin creams are going to be lipid soluble. They're not water soluble, they're lipid soluble. So lipid soluble materials are going to be found in our skin creams. And a lot of times skin creams will have certain vitamins in. Vitamins that are lipid soluble would include vitamins A, D, E, and K. Not all vitamins are lipid soluble. Some vitamins are water soluble. Okay, so you can't say that all vitamins can be absorbed through the skin, but those vitamins that have a compatible lipid chemistry can be absorbed through the skin. And I'll give you a quick list here. A, D, E, and K. We also have to be aware of certain lipid-soluble drugs that might be prescribed to us. Okay, so let me ask you this in the chat window. Are you aware of men in your life that might have testosterone patches prescribed from a doctor? Let me ask you this. Hold on a sec. Here we go. Are you aware of women in your life, particularly those going through menopause, that have estrogen patches prescribed? Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here, folks, is that many of the hormones we associate with gender, with sex, testosterone, estrogen, sometimes progesterone. Okay, these are actually hormones. They are lipid soluble hormones. Okay, their chemical structure is compatible with lipid chemistry. And so one way that you can treat someone that's going through change of life is to give them an estrogen patch that they can place on their skin, and slowly throughout the day, the estrogen will be absorbed through the skin and eventually into the bloodstream and help moderate the estrogen level. Typically in women, that's used for women, but a comparable analogy would be in men with the testosterone, right? As men age, Sometimes their testosterone level dips below a healthy level, and so a doctor might prescribe a testosterone patch for a male. Okay, and so it's one very easy way to get a slow entry of the drug into the body through the skin. Okay, so many folks are treated with testosterone and estrogen patches to treat male and female hormonal deficiencies. And it also is worth bearing out that, you know, if you are a woman and you're living with a guy that's on testosterone patches, you really want to avoid touching those testosterone patches if you're a gal, because that testosterone will also go through your skin and alter your testosterone level and can potentially mess up your hormones. Conversely, if you're a guy and you're living with a woman who's on estrogen patches, you want to avoid touching those estrogen patches because it will enter your skin, get into your bloodstream, and also alter your hormonal balance in your body. So you want to be wary of touching anybody's hormone patch if it's not been prescribed for you. Okay, so just be careful of that. Okay. Last thing I'm going to mention with this category, do you have any questions about excretion and absorption you'd like to ask? Okay, last thing I'm going to mention here in terms of function of skin is vitamin D synthesis. Okay, now vitamin D synthesis, we're going to go in more detail in the next chapter, chapter 6, but let me highlight just a couple major ideas at this time. Okay, first off, we're seeing here in your notes, right, this letter F, vitamin D synthesis, is under the heading of functions of the skin. That vitamin D synthesis is a function of the skin. But let me be very clear to you about this, okay? Your skin does not manufacture vitamin D. It does not make vitamin D. What your skin does make are precursor molecules that the body needs to ultimately make vitamin D, okay? So without these precursor molecules, the body would not be capable of manufacturing vitamin D. Okay, so vitamin D is not itself made in the skin. Precursor molecules needed to synthesize vitamin D are made in the skin. I will teach you all about that chemistry. And when I say chemistry, it's going to involve some chemistry, but we're not going to worry about, you know, balancing chemical equations or anything like that. But there is a chemistry to this, right, that I will share with you in chapter 6. Okay, the basic idea here is when you expose yourself to sunlight, the ultraviolet radiation of sunlight triggers the formation of these precursor molecules in your skin. Those precursor molecules are then dumped into your bloodstream and delivered to a variety of organs inside your body that chew on these precursor molecules and change them in a way that ultimately leads to the production of vitamin D. Okay, and so we know that vitamin D is not made in the skin. The precursor molecules to vitamin D are made in the skin. Vitamin D is super mega important for our body because without vitamin D, we cannot absorb calcium from our diet, okay? Vitamin D is critically important to the absorption of calcium in our diet. Without the vitamin D, your small intestine is not able to absorb calcium from the foods and liquids that you consume. Calcium is mega important, okay? Without calcium, your skeletal muscles don't contract properly. That's something we'll talk about later. Without proper levels of calcium, you cannot release neurotransmitters in the nervous system, in your brain. Brain doesn't work properly without calcium. Without calcium, certain glandular tissues throughout the body are not capable of releasing their hormones into the bloodstream. Okay, calcium is super important. So, that's why it's important that we maintain healthy levels of vitamin D in our body. And, you might be aware of somebody that's on a vitamin D supplement that's been prescribed from their doctor. That's pretty normal. Okay. All right. Folks, do you have any questions about functions of the skin? I mean, if you look at this laundry list of items we've placed into it, regulating your body temperature, storing blood volume, protecting us from a variety of threats from the environment, microbial threats, ultraviolet radiation threats, offering us the capability to sense the world around us through touch, vibration, tickling, etc., excrete material to cool us, absorb material that are important for hormones and vitamin composition, synthesizing the precursors to vitamin D. The skin is hugely important to our overall health. In fact, many people think that your health starts on the inside of your body and works out. I think we can make a very compelling and strong case that the health of your body starts on the outside and works inside. Okay. So do you have any questions at this time? Okay. All right. So hopefully the ideas I put into your notes are connecting with things that you've read about and are reading as you study chapter 5. Okay, so I've spent most of my lecture time in chapter 5 talking about the anatomy and functions of the skin. I want to be sure that I also talk about some associated structures with the skin. So I'm talking primarily about hair, glands, and if we have time, maybe a little bit about your nails. So let's do this. Okay, I'm going to start by talking about hair. And hair is one of the structures that is actually given a figure, a pretty important figure in chapter 5, figure 5.4. Go ahead and open your textbook to figure 5.4. Okay, so we're changing our notes at this time from the skin to accessory structures of the skin. This is going to be number 7. Okay, so when I say accessory structures, I'm talking about hair, talking about different types of glands, and and nails. All right, let's talk about hair. Okay, so hair, does a number of things for us. Hair does provide a limited amount of physical protection, very limited, but still a little bit, provides a limited amount of physical protection to our scalp, right? I mean, if something potentially harmful is going to fall onto our head, well, it's got to get through that mat of material, that hair on the top of your head before it reaches your epidermis, right? So it does provide a little bit of protection that way. So hair offers limited protection to our scalps. Okay. Also, hair provides some capacity to perceive a sensation, to perceive touch on the surface of our skin, right? I mentioned the hair root plexus, which I'll be documenting more about here in this section of notes. Contains sensory receptors to detect the motion of hair and provide touch sensation. Okay, let's take a little bit. Well, one more thing I'll say here is, exactly what is a hair? Well, a hair is a column of dead keratinized epidermal cells. Hairs are really long columns of dead keratinized epidermal cells. So you have a dead cell and another dead cell stacked on top, and another dead cell stacked on top, and another one on top, top. So you get a tube of dead epidermal cells that are bonded by extracellular proteins that link the plasma membranes of the cells that are stacked on top of each other. Okay. Here's our really long columns of dead keratinized epidermal cells that are bonded together by extracellular proteins. Okay, let's take a quick look at the hair anatomy. I'm not going to give you an extensive coverage here, but we'll mention a couple things that we would expect you to know. And having figure 5.4 open is very useful at this time, because when I say a structure, you can look down on the picture and say, okay, I get it. That's what he's talking about. Okay, so please try to have figure 5.4 open. When we talk about hair anatomy, the very first thing is going to be the part of the hair that we most associate with hair, and that's the part of the hair that's actually above the surface of our skin. This is known as the hair shaft. Okay, the hair shaft. Okay, you can probably see that best in picture B. Picture B is in boy of figure 5.4. You have an orangish brown colored hair shaft there. Obviously, that's artificially colored for purposes of the textbook. Okay, but you do see a hair shaft there. This is the portion of the hair that extends above the surface of the skin. The portion of the hair that sits below the surface of the skin, well, that's going to be the hair root. Okay, so you can see hair root there in panel A. If you look at panel A, you can see not only hair shaft, but the portion of the hair underneath the surface, which is the hair root. You also see a blown up diagram of the hair root on picture C as in Charlie. Along the right side of picture C, you see the bold-faced hair root colon, and then structures that make up the hair root, right? The medulla, the cortex, the cuticle of the hair, that type of thing. Okay. The hair root is the portion of the hair that extends below the surface of the skin. Okay. Let me also mention to you here the hair follicle, because I bet you've heard of, you know, your follicles, your hair follicles, right? It's something that we hear about, and it does have some interesting intersection with forensic science and criminology. Okay, so the hair follicle, as you see it there, is it is the structure that surrounds the root of the hair, if you will. It surrounds the root of the hair. Okay, if you look at picture D on the bottom right corner of figure 5.4, take a look at picture D as in dog, picture D as in David, and identify the hair root on the right side of picture D. And then on the left side, you see the bold-faced term hair follicle colon, internal root sheath and external root sheath. Okay, so let me just be sure that you are looking at the right places here, folks. Okay, so let me ask a question in the chat window. Here we go. What is the color of the internal root sheath that is part of the hair follicle in figure 5.4D? What color would you say it is? Okay, so getting some quick responses here. Thank you, folks. You're doing great. Okay, absolutely right. Is that orange colored gradation that you see in the textbook? Nicely done. Okay, so the hair follicle. Okay, this is the portion of your hair that surrounds the root. Okay, and I'll make some comments here. At the base of each hair follicle, okay, at the base of each hair follicle is sort of an onion-shaped structure called the bulb. Okay, an onion-shaped structure called the bulb. You can most carefully see the bulb as a bracketed term. Figure 5.4, letter C is in Charlie. You see the hair bulb. Hair bulb. It has layering like an onion. Okay, so notice the hair bulb at the base of each hair follicle is an onion-shaped structure called the hair bulb. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay. Inside the bulb, inside the hair bulb of each hair follicle, there's a special indentation called the papilla of the hair. Okay, the papilla of the hair. You can most carefully notice this in picture C as in Charlie. Picture C as in Charlie of figure 5.4. Notice the papilla of the hair. Okay, the papilla of the hair contains areolar connective tissue, which contains blood vessels that provide oxygen and nutrients to the cells that are supporting the hair, that are still living and taking care of the overall health of the hair. Okay. Inside the bulb of each follicle is an indentation called the papilla of the hair. Okay, so let me highlight that. Which contains areolar connective tissue and blood vessels which nourish the hair follicle. Okay. One more thing I'm going to mention here. If you look very carefully, the bulb also contains a germinal layer. A germinal layer, meaning that a layer where you're going to find stem cells that replenish the hair with new cells that as they grow out, they die. And that's how our hair grows longer and longer, right? So you start out with a 3-inch hair that over time will grow to 6 inches and longer and longer and longer. This germinal layer is called the hair matrix. The hair matrix is also shown to you in picture C as in Charlie of figure 5.4. Okay. The bulb also contains a germinal layer of cells, and there's the stem cells, called the hair matrix. Cells that are part of the hair matrix are responsible for your hair's ability to grow ever longer, to increase in length. Okay. And one final thing, you may have heard, in various television shows that you watch, different crime dramas. I'm thinking like NCIS or whatever it is you might enjoy, right? People always talk about, oh, we discovered a hair follicle at the murder scene or something like that. And that is useful because, the dead cells of the hair shaft, well, they don't have any DNA intact that's very useful for forensic investigation. But the cells below the surface of the skin, in the hair root, and even more appropriately in the hair follicle, do contain some living cells with intact DNA. And it's in that region of the hair, if you get a hair follicle, you're going to find cells that you can recover intact DNA to do a crime scene investigation. Okay. Okay, cells in the hair follicle are alive and contain intact DNA that can be used for forensic analysis. Okay. So, you know, you might find somebody's hairbrush who is a suspect, and you find some hairs there. If any of the hairs in the hairbrush and the tines of the hairbrush contain follicles, well, then you have enough DNA that you can start doing something with it. Okay. Letter D here. Okay, I'm going to point out two more features of hair anatomy. Okay, there are smooth muscle cells connected to each hair. They form what is called the erector pili. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, so probably here you can get your best image on panel A. A is an apple, figure 5.4. You see the erector muscle of the hair. The erector muscle of the hair. Notice if you follow where that term is located and you follow down to the left in the diagonal, you will notice it's associated with the hair bulb there. Okay, so smooth muscle cells connect to each hair and form the erector pili, which are responsible for the formation of goosebumps. Okay, so, you know, if you're scared at Halloween or you're cold because it's getting chilly outside and you find goosebumps developing on your skin, it's due to the contraction of the erector pili, smooth muscle tissue in the fabric of your dermis. Okay. So I'm going to highlight erector pili. Okay, everything I'm highlighting here is important vocab, folks, right? Important vocab. One final thing here. I also have mentioned and want to mention here that, you know, around each hair follicle, you are going to find the hair root plexus. You can see that again in picture A is an apple, figure 5.4. It's also, I believe, in figure 5.1, if you prefer to look at it there. Yeah, it's also present in figure 5.1. Okay, surrounding each hair follicle are dendrites of neurons that form a hair root plexus. Okay. These hair root plexuses, if you will, they have the ability to create nerve impulses. They have the ability to generate electrical signals anytime the hair is physically agitated, most notably by, you know, wind blowing across the hairs or somebody touching the surface of your skin. Okay, so these dendrites have the ability to create electrical signals when the hair fiber is moved. All right, folks, so there you have hair in a nutshell. Okay, you have hair in a nutshell. And we're going to move on next to glands, but let me stop and ask you, would you like to ask any questions about hair at this moment of time? Now, when we think about our hair, sometimes we have hair, if we haven't bathed for a day or two, our hair starts to get a little oily, doesn't it? Kind of gets a little gunky and dirty. Well, that doesn't really have anything to do with the hair anatomy itself. It has to do with the glands that are associated with the hairs. And we're going to talk about that next. So when we think about the health of our hair, we might think about whether our hair is overly dry or overly oily. And that has to do with the glandular activity, not the actual hair fibers themselves. So let's talk about glands at this time. Okay, remember, we're talking about glands in the context of your skin. Some glands are associated with hair fibers, others are not. Okay, all right, so letter B here. All right, let's talk about sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are oil glands. Okay, I'll just put the term oil in there right after the fancy word sebaceous. Most people know about oil glands, but the fancy term is sebaceous. Okay. Sebaceous glands are frequently associated with hair follicles. Okay. And in fact, if you look at figure 5.4, okay, you can see in picture A as an apple, you can see a sebaceous gland. And if you look at the picture of the sebaceous gland and you follow it up towards the surface of the skin, you notice that it's kind of opens onto the surface of the hair itself. They kind of intersect, right? Like if my right hand is the hair follicle, the sebaceous gland is coming up on an angle and intersecting with it. Please take note of that. Okay, so these types of glands are frequently associated with hair follicles. The secreting portion of the gland typically lies in the dermis and it opens onto the neck of the hair follicle. Okay. Now the material that is released from the sebaceous glands is given a special name. The material that's secreted, we think of it as oil, but from a proper science perspective, it's called sebum, S-E-B-U-M. Material secreted by these glands is known as sebum. Okay, so here we are. I'll highlight that by underlining it. And sebum consists, what is it made of? It consists of a variety of triglycerides, cholesterol, proteins, and inorganic salts. So when we say inorganic salts, that's, inorganic means there's no carbon atoms present. So we're talking basically sodium chloride, calcium chloride, maybe some magnesium and manganese chloride as well. Okay. So this substance called sebum, what does it do? Well, it coats the surface of the hair and prevents the hair from becoming overly brittle. I mean, the hair fiber should be coated with a light film of oil, a light film of sebum, and that helps maintain the structural integrity of the health of the hair so it doesn't break down. Sebum coats the surface of the hair and prevents the hair from becoming brittle. Okay. Sebum will also prevent excess evaporation. It will also prevent excess evaporation from water from the skin. And sebum also has some antimicrobial properties that protect against microorganisms, right? I mean, any area of your body where you have an opening in the skin is a potential threat because it can allow microbes to enter your body. Obviously, if you cut your skin, let's say you're shaving and you nick your leg or you nick your chin, whatever, right? Where you nick the skin is a concern because it's creating an opening for microbes. But there are also natural openings in the surface of our skin, right? Our skin pores around our hair follicles, where the sebum is going to be released onto the shaft of the hair. That's all a natural opening in the surface of our skin, which represents a problem point for microorganisms. So one of the solutions that Mother Nature came up with is to manufacture sebum with materials that tend to be antimicrobial in nature. The chemical composition of sebum is antimicrobial. To prevent infection. All right. Okay, folks. So that is our sebaceous glands. Okay, I'm just watching the clock here to see how far I can get with this. Okay, let's take the other category of glands, our sweat glands. Okay, sweat glands are more properly called sudoriferous glands. I know that's a bit of a mouthful. Okay. When I, we all have to play some sort of mind games with ourselves to remember things, right? We all need to have different mental hooks and triggers that allow us to remember things. When I think about a sweat gland, sudoriferous comes to mind because when I say the word sudoriferous, I'm reminded of the word odor. Sudoriferous reminds me of odor. And of course, if we don't bathe for a while and we sweat a lot, we're going to have some body odor, okay? So sudoriferous is a sweat gland. Sweat glands release perspiration onto the hair follicles or onto the surface of the skin through pores, which are the natural openings I was talking to you about. Okay, there are actually two categories of sweat glands that you may or may not be aware of. Let's talk about these. Okay. Okay, so yes, the two categories of sweat glands I'm going to put in your notes are also in panel A of figure 5.4, and they are also in figure 5.1. So you can look at either location to get this. Okay, first we have the eccrine sweat glands. Okay. The eccrine sweat glands are the type of sweat gland that most people think about when they think about sweating. So when you've been, chopping down a tree outside your house, or mowing the yard in the hot sun, or playing a game of softball, or running a marathon, when we sweat, where is that sweat coming from? Well, it's being manufactured and released by the eccrine sweat glands. These sweat glands are located throughout most regions of our body. Okay. These are the types of glands that we typically think of when we see sweat produced by physical exercise. Okay. These glands are located throughout most areas of our skin. Okay. The primary function of these glands is to regulate body temperature through the evaporation of sweat. Excuse me. All right. So your eccrine sweat glands, they start working very quickly after you're born, right? When you're an infant, your eccrine sweat glands start to function. There is, however, a second type of gland which we might not think about as much. These are the apocrine sweat glands. Apocrine sweat glands are not typically considered. We don't spend time thinking about this. Apocrine sweat glands release sweat at times of emotional intensity. So let me ask you this in the chat window. Okay, yes, have you ever needed to give a public speech and found yourself sweating? I mean, have you ever had an experience like that? Most students do, because, you know, even if it's just for a course where you have to write a speech and give it. That's part of what we do as part of education, right? It's part of the torture of students, right? Okay, so you do some public speaking, you get nervous about it, and you sweat. Well, that kind of sweat that's being associated not because you're overly heated, but because you're nervous. That kind of sweat is being produced by the apocrine sweat glands. Okay, so these glands produce perspiration during times of emotional intensity, okay, such as, you know, public speaking, or perhaps if you are afraid, right? I mean, if, you know, I'm not talking about the kind of enjoyable fear you have when you ride a roller coaster. I'm talking about you're really in a fearful situation for your life. You might find yourself sweating because you are really emotionally involved in what's happening, okay? You will also find apocrine sweat glands at work during sexual intercourse, during reproduction. Okay, that is certainly an emotionally intense event when we're engaging in that activity. And so if you sweat during sexual activity, predominantly that's going to be the apocrine sweat glands as well. Okay. These glands are not located throughout most of your skin's anatomy. They're only found in certain areas of the body. These glands are concentrated, okay, they're concentrated in the armpit, the groin, the areolae of the breasts, and curiously enough, in the bearded region of males. All right. And as you might surmise, due to their function, particularly during sexual activity, apocrine sweat glands themselves are not functional when you're born. They're not functional during early childhood. Apocrine sweat glands become metabolically active and start working at the onset of puberty, okay? Glands only become functional / active at the onset of puberty. Okay. Oh dear, I'm almost out of time, folks. I'm going to give you one more kind of gland and give you like a note on it, and we will call it quits here. Okay. The last kind of gland that I want to give you some information about are the earwax glands, the ceruminous glands. Okay. So ceruminous glands are actually a specialized modified type of sweat gland. These glands are modified special sweat glands located in the external ear. Okay. And when these specialized sweat glands release material, that material mixes with normal sweat gland secretions to form earwax. Okay. Earwax is formed by combining, by combining the secretions of ceruminous glands and traditional eccrine sweat glands. Okay. So, I won't go any further because we're out of time here, but you know that the purpose of earwax is to provide a sticky barrier to prevent things that might float into your ear through the wind currents, or God forbid, crawl into your ear when we're talking about insects and other things, right? So question in the chat window. Here we go. Have you heard stories, perhaps horror stories of folks needing medical attention for insects that are getting stuck in the ear, right? It's kind of a disturbing reality, but nonetheless, most of those stories are true because, every year across the globe, thousands of people do have to get medical attention for this kind of thing. Not pleasant, but it happens, and we have to accept that it's part of life on our planet Earth, okay? All right, folks, I'm over time, so I'm going to stop here. I think we're in pretty good shape. We will be starting chapter 6 next week. Okay, do you have any questions you'd like to ask before we wrap up this morning? Okay, folks, thanks for your attention. Remember, there is no lab today, but I want to encourage you maybe to take some private study time for yourself. That would be beneficial for you. Of course, later today, I also have office hours if you need me for anything. So folks, take care. Have a nice weekend, and we'll get started chapter 6 on Monday. See you later.
Thank you.